Hello gamers, this is Sai and welcome back to Which Way Games. It's finally time to continue the epic journey started 20 years ago.
And with that being said, let's get on with the video.
When it comes to legacies within the world of gaming, there are so many games to choose from that each have their own loyal fan bases. Each of these gaming series created their own world filled with unique characters and epic adventures, while also telling an engaging as well as fantastic story. Such games like Chrono Trigger, the Final Fantasy series, and even The Secret of Mana. But there's one game that's infamous for its own legacy, despite only having 2 games under its belt.
This would be the Shenmue series, which has gained a cult following since its release 20 years ago.
When Shenmue first graced its presence with gamers, the gaming world was stunned by how one game could change the face of gaming and really push the boundaries of what was possible for a video game. The very idea of being able to play in a living, breathing virtual world was unheard of at the time, and gamers couldn't believe how amazing it looked. Sega had really outdone themselves and gamers wanted more, which of course Sega eventually did with a sequel, but more on that later.
At the time of this video, Shenmue 3 is due to be released, but today I'll be looking at the first in the series. But before I carry on, let's go back to where it all started.
Development for Shenmue had historical links within the world of arcade gaming, especially in the mid to late 80s. Shenmue creator Ryo Hazuki was responsible for creating some of the arcade classics of the time, known to gamers such as Hang On, Outrun and Virtua Fighter. All of these are great games to play, but as with most arcade games, the experience of playing is very short-lived. Suzuki had always wanted to create a game where gamers would have a longer experience while playing, and so he looked towards the world of role-playing games for inspiration. Obviously ahead of the game was Square with their Final Fantasy series, and even Nintendo had their own spin on the RPG genre with The Legend of Zelda. Suzuki had plans to create a world where gamers could interact with NCPs as well as having subquests to extend the time gamers would be playing for.
However, once he continued with the popularity streak with his previous games, Suzuki came up with the idea of expanding the universe of Virtua Fighter.
Virtua Fighter is a fighting series very much like Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat, even having a roster of fighters each with a unique trait and personality. One character that became the mascot of the Virtua Fighter series was Akira Yuki, sharing similarities with Ryu from Street Fighter, each on a quest to search for a way to improve their skills and find out the meaning behind true strength. With the release of the Sega Saturn, Suzuki began work on an RPG based on the Virtua Fighter series, with Akira being the main protagonist. This would be known as Virtua Fighter RPG Akira's Story, where the premise of the game would be having Akira dealing with different themes depending on the location. The overall idea was the Virtua Fighter RPG series would eventually involve the other characters from Virtua Fighter, but with the announcement of the Sega Dreamcast, development was moved away from the Saturn in favour of the superior technology of the new console.
Eventually, the Virtua Fighter theme was dropped entirely, where a new game based on the previous work was created, and thus Shenmue was born.
Sega was so positive that Shenmue would change the world of gaming that they announced Shenmue should belong in a whole new genre of itself. Suzuki was now able to create large open environments for gamers to explore, and he decided that Shenmue should take place in 1986 Yokosuka, Japan. Each of these environments would be filled with mini-games as well as sub-quests. But Suzuki wasn't quite finished there. With most open world games, there is a night and day cycle. However, Suzuki wanted to push this further with a weather system that would affect all characters within the game. With all these different ideas as well as new concepts, Shenmue became known as the most expensive game ever developed at the time, and this was announced way before it was released.
Reported at costing $17 million, Shenmue was going to be something special, and Sega knew it.
Sega announced that Shenmue would span multiple games to create a virtual world for gamers to explore, with the main protagonist called Ryo Hazuki travelling the world on his own quest for vengeance. And come December 1999, Shenmue was released with much anticipation for gamers to finally play.
And like always, let's go back to the past to see how Shenmue was advertised.
In Into an immense world where time flows eternal, you shall venture. Making acquaintances, then parting. Embark on a journey that shall touch your heart in ways you have yet to experience. Shenmue, now it is time for your saga to begin.
The story of Shenmue begins in Yokosuka, Japan, late November 1986. Ryo Hazuki returns home to find everything eerily quiet and a strange black car outside. He notices the housekeeper laying on the ground injured. Ryo helps her up and learns his father is in the family dojo speaking with a stranger dressed in green but has evil looking eyes. Sensing something doesn't feel right about the situation, Ryo heads towards the dojo where he can hear commotion coming from inside. Just before Ryo can enter the dojo, one of the students of his father is sent flying through the air and lands in the garden below. Ryo enters inside the dojo and sees his father Iowa in a heated argument with a stranger in green about the location of a dragon mirror. Not hearing of this type of mirror before, Ryo is shocked when the pair begin to fight. However, the stranger in green is able to dodge every single attack and move so fast as if possessed by a demon. Iowa is then sent flying in the air after being kicked, and Ryo intervenes but is stopped in his tracks by the stranger.
The stranger dressed in green turns out to be a Chinese man known as Lan Di.
Feeling unable to move, Ryo is then grabbed by the throat by Lan Di, who holds him high in the air and begins to choke him. Ryo, now struggling for breath, is powerless against Lan Di and can feel himself slipping away. Never taking his eyes off Ryo, Lan Di demands to know where the dragon mirror is located, but Iowa refuses to tell him. Angered by this, Lan Di threatens to kill Ryo, and fearing for his son's life, Iowa reveals that the mirror is buried under the cherry blossom tree outside in the garden. The men of Lan Di then head outside to dig up the mirror, and Lan Di mentions Zhao Sunming, a man that Iowa allegedly killed many years ago in China. Iowa is shocked by this name, and still fearing for Ryo, Iowa decides to fight Lan Di once again. However, Lan Di is far too fast and leads a deadly finishing blow that sends Iowa back onto the floor of the dojo. Ryo then rushes to his father's aid, but sadly Iowa dies in Ryo's arms. Being haunted by the events of that day, as well as a mysterious girl appearing in his dreams, Ryo must find out the connection between his dead father and Lan Di.
Gameplay for Shenmue has gamers controlling Ryo Hazuki in an open world environment of 1980s Japan.
The game developers really brought the world of 1980s Japan to life with the beautifully rendered locations for gamers to explore. Starting out in the small town of Yamanoshi, Ryo will be able to interact with many non-playable characters and ask them questions regarding the incident with Lan Di. Most of the time they will give him useful information, but this is depending on the time of the day as to also influence the overall answers. This is where the night and day cycle really comes into play, where gamers could be interacting with an NCP while they're on the way home from work or even at a local bar unwinding. Ryo will also be able to interact with many places as well as objects found within the world of Shenmue, such as the gumball machines for example that give out prizes.
However, one of these prizes is Sonic the Hedgehog, although he wasn't around in 1986, but being a Sega game, it's nice to see gamers' favourite blue hedgehog.
The places Ryo will interact with are the many shops that are found, as well as an arcade where if gamers have enough money, games such as Space Harrier can be played. Gamers will also be able to participate in quick time events found within the arcade that really help later on in Shenmue as the story unfolds. Eventually in Shenmue, the links to Virtua Fighter that I mentioned before come into play. Ryo will either train various martial arts movements in the dojo, where more will become unlockable as gamers play, and he'll even end up getting into a fist fight with many enemies in order to progress the story. If gamers took the time to practice, then Ryo would have the advantage while dealing with the game's enemies, even going to the point of becoming a master of the martial art Ryo has been taught. Shenmue sold very well and became the 4th best-selling game on the Dreamcast. However, due to the development costs, it was classed as a commercial failure. However, for gamers, this didn't matter, as Shenmue was a game that was highly anticipated at the time and gamers wanted more. And another thing that Shenmue is famous for is the forklift races, which reminds me of another gaming series. Coming back to the story, after dealing with the many trials and tribulations, Ryo's investigations leads him to a man known as Master Chen at Yokosuka Harbour. Ryo learns that the dragon mirror taken by Lan Di is one of 2 mirrors, the other is known as the Phoenix Mirror. Eventually, the Phoenix Mirror is found buried in the hidden basement of his father's dojo, as well as a letter from a mysterious man called Yuanda Shu who had warned Iowa of Lan Di's intentions. Ryo then finds out that Landy has left Japan and is on his way to Hong Kong. Master Chen informs Ryo that another master known as Zhao Yinghong might be able to aid him on his journey while in Hong Kong. But before Ryo can follow Landy, he is stopped by the local gang that have connections to Landy's criminal organisation. After what feels one of the biggest battles of his life so far, Ryo then boards the boat heading to Hong Kong and hopefully a confrontation with Landy.
At the time of release, Shenmue was praised by critics for its graphics, sense of realism and ambition in creating a whole new genre within the gaming world.
The attention to detail was noted, especially when it came to exploring a living virtual world of 1980s Japan. Gamers were stunned over the cost of development for Shenmue, but were pleased it was money well spent. As I mentioned before, Shenmue was a commercial failure, but this didn't stop Sega from producing a second installment for the series. With much of the first game being reused, Shenmue 2 didn't cost as much to develop. However, Sega wanted the game to have better environments, more interactivity, and a large open world for gamers to explore.
Shenmue 2 continues the story of Ryo Hazuki's quest for vengeance.
Ryo eventually makes his way to Hong Kong, however Landy is nowhere to be found, and Master Zhu Yinghong refuses to help him, classing Ryo's quest for vengeance as reckless as well as foolish. While in Hong Kong, Ryo teams up with 3 new allies who will help him on his journey. It turns out that the reason that Landy killed Ryo's father was that he believes that Iowa was responsible for the death of his own father. They all learn that Landy is heading to the mountains, and this is where Ryo meets the mysterious girl from his dreams. This girl is Shenhua Ling, and in a bizarre twist of fate, Ryo and Shenhua's fates are intertwined with each other. The pair then discover a cryptic note as well as an ancient sword, which Ryo then combines with the Phoenix Mirror. This triggers a large mural to reveal itself and shows the links between the 2 mirrors as well as the sword Ryo now wields. When Shenmue 2 was released, it was praised for improving on the many flaws found within the first game, even refining minor elements some gamers had overlooked. The Dreamcast had really been pushed to the very limits of its capabilities, and Shenmue 2 was just the game to do this. Sega's little white box of dreams has certainly lived up to its title of being the world's most powerful console at the time, before the PlayStation 2 took the crown.
Sadly, this is where Sega decided to opt out of the console market, especially with the poor sales of the Dreamcast, and with this, the story of Shenmue would not continue.
Eventually, Shenmue would gain a cult following, and fans of the series petitioned for Shenmue 3 to be made, even going to the point of creating a Kickstarter. But it wouldn't be until at least 20 years after the original game was released that Shenmue 3 would become a reality, and finally be able to be playable for gamers to enjoy as well as continue the story of Ryo Hazuki.
It would not be a conclusion to the story of the 2 previous games, but will in fact expand more on Ryo's journey.
At the time of this video, Shenmue 3 is due to be released shortly, which has the gaming world looking over it with great anticipation, especially with the cult following the series has gained over the last 2 decades. It'll be interesting to see how the story will progress and where the Shenmue series is being led to. Perhaps games will finally be able to confront Landy in an epic battle for vengeance, or is Landy merely a puppet for a more powerful entity?
Anyway, come back next time when Mickey Mouse has to clean up the mess he made before he became famous. But can he do this alone? Thank you so much for watching, and see you next game.
You